Jakarta Bay is one of the most polluted stretches of water in Asia. 13 rivers empty into it, carrying industrial runoff, sewage, and heavy metals from a city of more than 30 million people. Scientists who study it compare the risk to Minamata, Japan, in the 1950s, when mercury poisoning from a single bay left thousands of people paralyzed or dead. And in that same bay, on bamboo stakes driven into the mud a few hundred meters from the shoreline, Indonesian farmers are growing one of the cheapest, most abundant sources of protein in the entire city. Green mussels pulled from Jakarta Bay are bigger than mussels grown almost anywhere else nearby. And the reason they're bigger is the same reason a government official will tell you, on the record, not to eat them. This is the story of an industry that feeds a city precisely because of the poison it's built on, and the people who've decided that's a trade worth making. Green mussels, Perna viridis, known locally as karang hijau, are about as easy to farm as a marine animal gets. They need no hatchery. Wild larvae drift through the water and settle naturally onto any hard surface, so a farmer's entire investment can be a handful of bamboo poles driven into shallow, sheltered coastal mud. They need no feed. A mussel filters what it eats directly from the water column, pulling in plankton, organic matter, and, unavoidably, whatever else is suspended in the bay around it. And they grow fast, roughly 6 months from settled larva to harvestable size, year-round, with no season where production has to stop. That combination, free seed, free feed, 6-month turnaround, has made green mussels one of the most important small-scale aquaculture products on Java's north coast. Tanjung Kait, in Banten province just west of Jakarta Bay, is one of the largest green mussel cultivation sites in the country, with farmers there pulling in 1 to 3 tons of mussels a day. Inside Jakarta Bay itself, the trade is concentrated in a handful of named districts that most of the city's 30 million residents pass without a second thought: Muara Kamal, Muara Angke, Cilincing, and Kalibaru. Kalibaru alone is home to roughly 80,000 people packed into 250 hectares, one of the most densely populated and poorest districts in Jakarta. It grew up around what was once one of the city's busiest fishing ports, and today, fishing and green mussel farming are still the district's 2 main economic activities. Multiply Kalibaru by every other mussel district ringing the bay, and you start to see the actual size of an industry that barely shows up in any national economic headline. Thousands of families, an entire informal supply chain of divers, boat crews, and processors, built on an animal that costs almost nothing to grow. And the mussels don't stay in the districts that grow them. They're cleaned, sorted, and shipped out into markets across Greater Jakarta, a metropolitan region of more than 30 million people, as one of the cheapest proteins available at any market stall in the city. Jakarta's own fisheries agency recorded that residents ate 39.6 kilograms of seafood per capita in 2018, and more than 90% of the city's total seafood supply comes in from other provinces. Jakarta Bay's own catch, including its green mussels, is the exception. A genuinely local, genuinely cheap food source, grown a few kilometers from the people who eat it, in water that everyone studying it agrees is dangerous. The obstacle here isn't the animal. Green mussels are almost absurdly easy to grow. The obstacle is the water they're growing in. Jakarta Bay collects runoff from 13 separate rivers threading through one of the largest cities in the world, carrying industrial discharge, sewage, and heavy metals from decades of largely unregulated development along their banks. A 2017 University of Indonesia study traced much of that contamination to specific sources: the Cilincing, Cipinang, and Cibinong rivers on the city's eastern side, the Mukervart River in Tangerang, and the Pulau Gedung industrial area, zones known for chemical manufacturing and textile production, both notorious for heavy metal discharge when left unchecked. All 13 rivers eventually funnel into the same enclosed bay where the mussel stakes stand. Mussels don't just tolerate that water, they concentrate what's in it. A filter-feeding animal that pulls its entire diet from the water column has no way to filter out lead, cadmium, or chromium along with the plankton. The metals accumulate directly in its tissue. Multiple peer-reviewed studies on mussels harvested from Cilincing and Kamal Muara have confirmed exactly that. Measurable levels of lead, cadmium, and chromium in the meat, with real seasonal and site-to-site variation. A 2018 study went further, linking the heavy metal load in Muara Kamal's water directly to physical malformation in the cultured mussels themselves. Visible evidence, growing on the stakes, of what the bay is doing to the animals living in it. Eddie Riani, a professor at Bogor Agricultural University's Faculty of Maritime Affairs and Fisheries, has been blunt about what that means for the people eating the harvest. She's documented contaminants not just in green mussels, but in barracuda, ponyfish, leather jacketfish, and marble goby pulled from the same bay, and has warned that eating them regularly carries a real risk of cancer and kidney disease, the same category of harm, she said, as what happened in Minamata, Japan, in the 1950s, when a chemical company's mercury discharge poisoned an entire bay's seafood supply and left thousands of people with permanent neurological damage. That's the wall, an animal that's nearly free to grow, in the one body of water in the region where growing it is genuinely dangerous. The industry didn't solve the pollution problem. Nobody has. What changed instead was how efficiently farmers could grow mussels in the water they had. And, more recently, what they've started doing with the one part of the harvest that used to be pure waste. For generations, Indonesian green mussel farming meant one method: bamboo stakes, driven directly into shallow coastal mud, with larvae settling naturally onto the wood. It works, and it's nearly free to set up, but it caps out at modest yields. Trial plots using the stake method at Ankal produced roughly 200 tons per hectare per year. A newer method, longline culture, changed the math substantially. Instead of fixed stakes, ropes are suspended from floating lines, giving mussels far more surface area to colonize and better exposure to the moving water they filter feed from. Documented trial results on Java's north coast found longline culture producing roughly 400 tons per hectare per year at one site in Tangerang, and as much as 1,156 tons per hectare per year at a site in Banten. In the best cases, nearly 6 times the yield of the traditional stake method from the same amount of coastal water. The second shift is newer, smaller, and points somewhere the pollution problem couldn't: what happens to the shells. Processing a mussel harvest generates an enormous, constant stream of waste. In Kalibaru alone, a single processing stall produces an average of 20 sacks of discarded shells a day, and across just 23 surveyed stalls, that adds up to roughly 2,380 kilograms of shell waste daily, doubling or tripling during peak harvest season. None of it is accepted at municipal waste stations, so for years the default has simply been dumping it back into the bay, adding physical waste on top of the chemical contamination already there. Starting in 2022, Jakarta's city planning agency and a coalition of local and international partners began working with Changkring, a women's collective in Kalibaru, built around the mussel trade, to turn that shell waste into something sellable instead of something dumped. Industrial designers were brought in to prototype products a small community workshop could actually produce: paving blocks, decorative panels, lamps, phone holders, compost. 3 of those designs were selected for further development, and the collective began registering as a small business through the city's own SME support platform, with local government backing for material testing on the shell-based paving blocks. It's a small program, still early, still unproven at any real scale, but it's the first real attempt to turn the industry's most immediate, visible waste problem into income instead of another source of pollution. None of this makes Jakarta Bay safe, and nobody claims it does. Rita Nirmala, head of North Jakarta's Maritime, Fisheries, and Food Security Agency, has said plainly that eating fish and green mussels from Jakarta Bay is dangerous. But she's also described why the government's own attempts to fix the underlying problem have gone nowhere. With 13 rivers feeding the bay, officials can't easily trace contamination back to a specific factory or pin responsibility on a single polluter. And 2 separate attempts to relocate Jakarta Bay's fisherfolk to cleaner water, the Thousand Islands in 2016, Panambang and Banten in 2010, were refused by the fishing communities themselves. Part of the reason is almost darkly practical. Mussels grown in cleaner water, away from the bay's pollutant load, grow thinner and lighter, and a lighter mussel sells for less. Jakarta Bay's mussels, fed on water rich with both nutrients and contaminants, grow noticeably larger and heavier, which means they fetch a better price at market. The same pollution that makes the bay dangerous is, by the market's own logic, also what makes farming it worthwhile. Officials warn that contaminated mussels can sometimes be identified by a bubbly rather than flat appearance. But that's a warning sign most buyers at a crowded market stall have no reason to know, let alone check for. The human cost isn't hypothetical. Doyok, a 65-year-old fisherman working out of Muara Karang, has described skin diseases and diarrhea as routine hazards of the trade, common enough that a mussel diver hospitalized one day was back in the water within days of recovering. Death can happen anywhere, he said, when asked why he kept diving. His income swings with the seasons in a way that makes the risk feel less like a choice and more like a necessity. In the best months, October through December, he can bring in 80 to 100 buckets of mussels and earn around 4 million rupiah, a little under $300. In January and February, when heavier rain clouds the water and diving gets harder, that can fall to under 400,000 rupiah a month, a tenth of his best season income. And plenty of the people eating what Doyok and thousands like him pull from the bay simply aren't worried. Imam Santoso, a 28-year-old Jakarta resident, put it simply. He's eaten seafood from the bay, especially green mussels, since he was a kid, and he's been fine. That's not naivety so much as an accurate description of how this kind of risk actually works. Probabilistic, cumulative, and mostly invisible, right up until it isn't. Follow one mussel from settlement to market, and the entire economy of the bay becomes concrete. It starts with nothing more than a length of bamboo, or a rope on a long line, sunk into the shallows. Wild mussel larvae, drifting free in the water, attach themselves to the surface on their own. No hatchery, no seed purchase, no cost beyond the labor of setting the stakes or lines in place. Over the next 6 months, the mussels grow by filtering the bay itself, plankton and organic matter for food, and whatever industrial and household waste happens to be suspended alongside it, absorbed into the same tissue. Harvest is physical, dangerous work. Divers and boat crews pull mussels by hand from the stakes and ropes, working in water that runs murkier and harder to navigate during the rainy season, exactly when the current carries the heaviest sediment and runoff load down from the city's rivers. It's the stretch of the year fishermen like Doyok describe as the hardest to work and the leanest to earn in. Once ashore, the mussels move into processing, and in districts like Kalibaru, that's where the labor structure of the whole industry becomes visible. Processing stall owners, usually men with only a primary school education, run the stalls. The actual work of pre-cooking, cleaning, deburring, and separating the meat from the shell is done almost entirely by women, who make up roughly 80% of the workforce in the trade. That labor is often treated, informally, as supplementary income to a household, even though it's the step that turns a bucket of raw shellfish into something a market stall can actually sell. What's left after processing is the shell, tons of it, every single day, across every district doing this work. For most of the industry's history, that waste has gone straight back into the bay, since no municipal system accepts it. The newer shell recycling programs in Kalibaru are trying to intercept a small fraction of that waste stream before it becomes one more contaminant in the water, turning a byproduct that used to just accumulate into paving blocks and household goods instead. From there, the meat moves out into the market, cleaned, sorted, and distributed across Greater Jakarta as one of the most affordable proteins a family in the city can buy, sold by weight, at a price that has everything to do with how large and heavy the mussels grew, and nothing printed on the label about the water they grew in. Put the numbers from this industry side by side, and the shape of it is hard to miss. On the production side, green mussel farms on Java's north coast now range from the traditional 200 tons per hectare per year of bamboo stake culture up to 1,156 tons per hectare per year using longline methods, a nearly 6-fold jump in output from the same stretch of coastal water, achieved with nothing more than a change in how the ropes are hung. At Tanjung Kait alone, one of Indonesia's largest cultivation sites, farmers pull in 1 to 3 tons of mussels every single day. On the community side, Kalibaru's roughly 80,000 residents depend directly on an industry that, across just 23 surveyed processing stalls, generates close to 2.4 tons of shell waste a day, a number that only exists because an equivalent, and far larger, tonnage of mussel meat is being harvested, processed and sold in the same district, every day, on top of whatever volume moves through Muara Kamal, Muara Angke, Chilincing, and Tanjung Kate besides. Multiply that across every mussel farming district ringing Jakarta Bay, and an industry that has no clean national statistic attached to it, no ministry press release, no line item in any official economic report, turns out to be feeding a meaningful share of protein into a metropolitan region of more than 30 million people. And now, for the first time, a small piece of that industry's own waste is starting to generate income twice from the same harvest. Once as food, and once through the Changkring Collective's paving blocks and household goods, as raw material for something else entirely. There's no clean resolution to this story, and forcing one would be dishonest. Jakarta Bay is genuinely, measurably dangerous. Heavy metals in the water, heavy metals in the mussels, a documented cancer and kidney disease risk that a Bogor Agricultural University professor has compared directly to one of the worst industrial poisoning events of the 20th century. That risk is real, and it hasn't gone away, and none of the innovations in this story, better ropes, better yields, a small pilot program turning shells into paving stones, do anything to fix the water itself. And also, tens of thousands of people in districts like Kalibaru build their entire livelihood on this industry, feeding a meaningful share of one of the world's largest cities on a protein source that costs almost nothing to grow. Precisely because the alternative, abandoning the bay, relocating to cleaner water, growing thinner, less profitable mussels somewhere safer, has been offered, twice, by the government itself, and refused both times by the people who'd have to live it. Both of those facts are true about the same handful of bamboo stakes standing in the same polluted water. Green mussels didn't get big and marketable despite Jakarta Bay's pollution. In a very direct, uncomfortable sense, they got that way because of it. Whatever happens to the bay next, cleaner rivers, better regulation, more of the shell waste economy the Changkring Collective is only just starting to build. The industry that exists right now is exactly what it looks like. An entire, essential food economy built on water that everyone studying it agrees shouldn't be feeding anyone at all. If stories like this, where the thing keeping people fed and the thing putting them at risk turn out to be exactly the same water, are what you're here for, subscribe, because the next one goes looking for the same kind of trade-off somewhere else.